Hey friends, in this video I'm going to teach you how I created my own Zettelkasten. I'm going to assume that since you clicked on this video you already know what a Zettelkasten is, but in some case you don't. There will be links in the description where you can learn a lot more. But before we jump in, I want to give credit where credit is due. A lot of the techniques I learned and used come from this book, Anti-Net Zettelkasten by Scott Scheper. I personally have made some tweaks and adjustments to suit my own needs and purposes, but the bulk of it really comes from this book, and I could not have built this system without this book. I put a link in the description where you can check this out and get a copy, and you really need to get a copy of this if you are serious about creating your own analog Zettelkasten. And just to be explicit and very clear here, by analog I'm talking about a Zettelkasten with index cards, and we're doing things writing things by hand. We're not going to be using any digital tools like Obsidian or Roam Research or anything like this. We're going to do it exactly very similar to the way that Nicholas Luhmann created it and used it himself. So let's talk about the supplies you're going to need. I'll have links to everything in the description. So the first thing you're going to need is you'll need some index cards. I prefer to use 4x6 cards, but the standard 3x5 work just as well. It honestly doesn't really matter. But the reason why I prefer the 4x6 is they provide more room for you to write on. You will also need a pen. A pen doesn't matter. What kind of pen you use, what color ink doesn't matter. You can use a pencil, whatever you want to use to write with. But I prefer these micron pens. They have archival ink in them that will last a long time. They don't bleed or smear, and they dry very quickly. They're very cheap, and they also come in a variety of colors and nib sizes, which is nice. You're going to need a box to put your cards in and a set of alphabetical dividers. So the box is completely optional in the beginning, but you will need one eventually. To start, you can use a shoebox or similar, whatever you have kind of lying around the house. You could even just use a rubber band to wrap this stack of cards initially. You can also pick up cheap index card boxes from Amazon or an office supply store. These alphabetical card dividers are also optional in the beginning, but I would recommend that you get them sooner rather than later. The nice thing about this particular box, which I got from Amazon, is it comes with 4 compartments, one for each section of the Zettelkasten, and it also comes with the set of these alphabetical dividers, which is really nice to get started with. So a Zettelkasten has 3 main components or sections. The first of which is going to be your index, then you're going to have your main cards, and then you'll have your bib box. And the bib box is short for bibliography box. My 4th Zettelkasten has a 4th component that I call the catalog, and I'll explain what that is in a little bit. So for your Zettelkasten, you'll need at least 3 main components: index, main cards, the bib box. And then the 4th component, which I call the catalog, is completely optional, and it's up to you whether or not you want to use it. So the first component is the index. And this is what you're going to use those alphabetical dividers for. And the index acts like a map into your Zettelkasten. Here's where we're going to take note of various keywords, subjects, and information in your Zettelkasten. And so that way you can find and retrieve your main cards later on. So it's essentially a table of contents that allows you to quickly find the information that you're looking for. And then the next section is the most important section. These are your main cards, right? These are the heart and soul of any Zettelkasten. Here's where you store the knowledge and information you have gathered, created, curated, etc. These cards are the reason for creating your Zettelkasten in the first place, and they are your thinking partner, and that's really important, and there'll be more on that in a little bit. Bib box. So this is short for bibliography box. This is where you store all of your bib cards, and I will discuss what these are in greater detail later on in the video. Bib cards are the cards that you create while reading a book, for example, and it will contain the page numbers like this, and then a short description next to those page numbers describing the information located on that page that you may want to revisit later and potentially convert into a main card. Again, I'll explain this process in more detail later on. And then this next part is something I created for myself and for my Zettelkasten specifically. It is entirely optional, but I think you will find it useful. The catalog is a place where I list and number all of the original sources that I use and reference in my main cards, bib cards, etc. So when creating main cards, it is important to reference where the note originally came from, and the catalog is my super simple way of tracking the various sources used and referenced throughout my main cards in Zettelkasten. So for example, on this main card here, if you see in the bottom left-hand corner, I've got a number 2, and it's on page XII. The number 2 is a reference to my sources catalog, which is this number 2 here, which is The Intellectual Life by A.G. Zettelkasten. So now that we understand the components of a Zettelkasten, let's learn how to create one from scratch. So the first thing we're going to do is create the index. And for this, you'll need 26 index cards, one for each letter of the English alphabet, and a pen or something to write with. So the first thing you'll do is you'll take the first index card and you'll write the letter A in the upper left-hand corner like so. Then on the next index card, you'll write the letter B, and then for the third, C, and so on and so forth. And then once you're done, you should have 26 index cards, each card having a single letter on it in the upper left-hand corner, one for each letter of the alphabet. So for my Zettelkasten, I took a different approach when it comes to categorizing and indexing my main cards like I've done here. Scott in his book recommends that you create 5 cards, one for each academic discipline in the very beginning to organize your main cards. I personally think it's a pretty good idea if you don't have a project or rough idea of how you're going to be using your Zettelkasten or the type of research you're going to be doing. So I personally initially tried this idea, but in the end it didn't work for me. I didn't like having to constantly reference a Wikipedia article and creating arbitrary categories in between my main cards. It got really confusing to me, and frankly, it kind of took too long to figure out what the categories were. I wanted to create as little friction as possible, and so for this method, for me personally, it kind of got in my way and I didn't find it particularly helpful. Instead, I created a much simpler system and method for myself. Instead of imposing categories in a hierarchy from the start, I let my main cards and the sources I was reading create the categories instead. So this is a bottom-up approach rather than imposing a hierarchy from the top and then going down. So you really have 2 options at this point. One, you can use Scott's method, which he outlines in great detail in his book, which you should get a copy of. And that's really good if you don't know what research you're going to be doing or the projects you want to work on with your Zettelkasten. And then, or 2, you can let the sources you read and the main cards you create kind of dictate the categories and organizational hierarchy that you want. Since I took the second option, I'm going to demonstrate how to do that in this video. And because of that, we don't actually have to create any hierarchies at this time, since we don't have any main cards, so we don't need any categories. The third thing is a bib box, which again doesn't require us to do anything at this time since we don't have any bib cards. But once we have at least one bib card, we can file it in the bib card section of our box, which goes in the back like this. So wrapping up this section of this video, you should have your Zettelkasten box and your index cards created with 26 index cards, where each card has a single letter of the alphabet in the upper left-hand corner. And then if you're using alphabetical dividers, you will file each index card behind the corresponding divider like this. It says B divider, and then B card, etc. Okay, so right now our Zettelkasten is completely useless. It doesn't have any information in it at all. It only has some index cards with a single letter on them. So what makes a Zettelkasten really useful are the notes, the ideas, the quotes, and information that we put into it, and those would be on our main cards. In order to do that, we need to seek out this information from various sources. The majority of your sources will most likely be books, but podcasts, videos, conversations with friends, lectures, anything at all is perfectly viable. For this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I use bib cards to take notes while reading a book, and how I convert some of those notes into main cards. So once I've had a book that I'm going to read, I create a bib card for it. And in this example, I'll be using the book The Intellectual Life by A.G. Zettelkasten, and I highly recommend you read this book if you haven't read it already. And here's my bib card for this book. Actually, I have bib cards since I have 2 of them since there was so much good stuff located in this book. But the first thing I do is I take a single index card like this, and I write on the side with the ruled lines, and then the other side's completely blank. So the first thing I do is I write the author's name, last name first at the top, like this. Then I write the title and the subtitle of the book. And finally, I write the copyright, date of publication, or something similar. And this is just better help me know which edition of the book it is that I'm using. You will also notice that I have the number 1 circled in the top right-hand corner of this card. And I only added this once I introduced a second bib card. So this was not there originally when I first created this. I only created a one once I had another one so that I could tell which one was which and which order. Really great books like this one oftentimes will take up more than one card if they have lots of great ideas, insights, and information that you wish to capture in them. Then on the opposite side, I draw a straight line down the left-hand side. And the way that I do this is I use my book to line up the red line on the other side, which is printed on it. If you hold this up to the light, you can see, you probably can't see it in the video, but if you were to hold this up to a light source, you would be able to see that red line on this side through the other side. And then I use my book as a straight edge, and then I'll simply just draw that line like this. And that'll create this nice line down the left-hand side. And then on the left is where I'm going to write the page number, where I find the source of the material that I want to reference. And then to the right-hand side, I write a really quick description, a little note about the content that's located on that specific page. I've also created my own little like conventions and shorthands for things. So if you take a good look at this card, you'll see this E exclamation point. That to me tells me that that's an excerpt. So that to me is a quote that I want to write down verbatim. I sometimes, let's see if I have one here. I don't have it here. Sometimes I'll do something like a capital S and an exclamation point, and that tells me that there's a source either referenced in the main body of the text or down in the footnotes that I then want to go back and later take a look at and possibly read later on. So as I'm reading, I will take notes of things that I find interesting, and I will put square brackets around it. Let's see if I can find a good example for you. So here's some here. The reason why I do this is for kind of a couple of reasons. One, it makes finding the material much faster when I go back to review it. So when I go back and look at my bib card here, and I'm like, okay, I want to figure out and go look at the original source of whatever this note is on this page, then when I go to that page, it'll just jump right out at me and I know exactly where it's located because I bracketed it. The second reason is, God forbid I should lose this bib card or it should get destroyed or something like that. I can fairly easily create this from scratch again because I have all the important information bracketed in the book itself. So I kind of have like two sources, like a little bit of a backup. So once I go through the entire book and I finish reading it and my bib cards are complete like this, I put the book down and I don't touch it for 2 weeks. Oftentimes even longer, usually a month, sometimes even 6 weeks. And I do this for a very specific reason. The reason why is I only want the best material in my Zettelkasten, and time is the best filter for that. So as I'm reading, I will oftentimes make notes of things on my bib cards that I think are interesting at the time that I'm first reading them. However, after some time goes by, I often find that they are not really that useful or interesting anymore. So for example, out of 2 cards like this, I might only make maybe 8 cards, 10 cards, maybe more, but a lot of this stuff probably won't actually become a main card. And letting things sit and rest so your mind basically forgets about whatever you have been reading gives you a really fresh perspective, and it allows you to only pick and choose that which is really important that you want to create a main card and add to your Zettelkasten. So now we're going to assume that you've read at least one book and you've completed your bib cards for that book. You might only have one, you might have several. It doesn't really matter. So you've waited at least 2 weeks to a month and now you're ready to create main cards from your bib cards. I first like to read over my bib card or cards first to kind of refresh my mind about the various notes and topics that I referenced on these cards. Again, I haven't seen this material in about at least 2 weeks, but for me, it's really probably like 4 to 6 weeks. After reading the entire card or cards, I go back to the very beginning and I start looking up each note on the page that was referenced so I can see it in its entirety in this context. So for example, I'll go to the very first page number, which in this case is VII, and I'll look it up and I'll look up that note which I have marked up in the book. and I'll read the actual context from which this note came from. If I've determined that something is valuable enough for me to add to my Zettelkasten, then I create a main card for it. So let's take a look at some of my main cards I've created already for this particular book. The first thing we need to get into the habit of doing before we create a new main card, and this is really, really important, is you first need to determine where does this card belong. This is really the essential part of creating a Zettelkasten, and it needs to be considered even before you even create the card. So in our case, since we're creating our very first card, it should be rather straightforward. There's only one place to put it, and that's like right in the main card section, because we don't have any other cards. But as you incorporate more cards and add more cards to your Zettelkasten, you want to be going through them and finding out, okay, where does this note or piece of information, where does it make the most sense in the cards that I already have? And you want to be filing it as closely to its most related card, if that makes any sense. The first thing I did was to create a category to file all of my main cards for the book under first. Again, I let the source material dictate the category and the hierarchy here, and I created a simple card called Mind with the number 1 on it in the upper right hand corner. And I like to write it on the blank side on the back, but you can do whatever you want. I wanted the category to be pretty generic so that future sources can be nested underneath it. However, it's also important for you to know that I'm currently researching things related to the mind for the Intellectual Life project, which is a newsletter and some YouTube videos and a bunch of stuff I'm kind of researching. So having a project in mind, though, really helps make this whole process so much easier. So I highly recommend you have a project and reason for creating a Zettelkasten in the first place before you go about creating one. Rather than just reading a bunch of random books and just creating a bunch of random notes, it helps to actually be doing research and having a purpose for the books and the sources that you're reading. You have to remember that the whole point is not to just collect a whole bunch of random pieces of information, which is one of the reasons why I like the analog way and not the digital way. The digital way allows it too easy for you to just copy and paste and get a whole bunch of stuff and just shove it into a markdown file or something like that. Having a little bit more friction and actually writing things out by hand, again, furthers the selection process. And remember that the whole point of a Zettelkasten is not to collect and store and like personal knowledge management. You're not managing knowledge here. The whole point is to output. You're supposed to do something with all these main cards and all this research and create work that you're going to share with other people and with the world. So then I created another category underneath Mind, which is I'm just calling Life of the Mind or the Intellectual Life. Again, this is a little confusing because that's also the name of the book, but it's also part of a project I'm doing based upon the book. So I have Mind as a more general topic. I put the number 1. And then I have another subtopic, Life of the Mind, the Intellectual Life, because again, this is like my first source. And then I do 1/1. So the first one is for the Mind card and the Parent card. And then for the second card or the Child card, I'm putting this 1/1 here. A lot of people get really confused by the numbering system in Zettelkasten, and honestly, it really doesn't matter. The numbering system is completely arbitrary, and you can use whatever system you want. For now, just use what I'm doing to get started, and you can always change it later. Like you could use letters, you could do 1/A, you could do 1-A, you could do 1.A, 1.1. It doesn't really matter. It's really important that you don't get hung up on the numbers and try to get everything perfect all in the beginning. You should really embrace your mistakes and the chaos, and Scott talks about that in his book. As you gain more experience with all of this, you will most likely change how you number and organize things, and that's expected. The reason why I can say the numbering system is kind of arbitrary and it doesn't really matter is that you have your index here, and this is going to tell you where everything is located. So the numbering system, the reason why it can be kind of random and why you can change it throughout the course of your Zettelkasten as you further develop it is that the index is your source of truth, it's your map, it's your table of contents, and this tells you where everything's located. So seriously, don't stress about the numbers, just follow my example or use some of the examples in Scott's book just to get started. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples from my own Zettelkasten here. This will kind of help you a little bit. I'm just going to take all of my main cards out. Okay, so we covered in last section the mind category, the number 1, right? And then here's like the child category of that. So this would be the parent, life of the mind, 1/1. And then we get into the first card. So mind is 1. The next category is 1/1. And so for my first card, I filed it under 1/1/0. In this case, I used a 0. The reason why is that I'm pretty sure this was actually not the first card that I had created. The first card I had created with the 1. So the first card, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was 1/1/1. But then again, like I was telling you earlier, it's really important that when you're creating cards, you're finding the best place to add them. And I felt like this card should go in front of this other card. So in order for me to do that, I just put a 0. Now, if you already have a 0, you could also use negative numbers too. So if something wanted to go in front of this card, I'd do 1/1/1 or something like that. And this is what I mean by being flexible. If you create your first card and find that one should go in front of it, again, use a negative number, use a letter, whatever kind of convention that makes the most sense to you. So let's break down kind of like how this works and all this information that's on this card. The first thing I write in the top left-hand corner is like a brief little topic or summary about what this card is actually about. So this card is about the dangers of the intellectual life, taken from the Intellectual Life book. In the middle, this is my note. And so I've written, the intellectual life can be a dangerous life. And Zettelkasten says certain vices and things that you can have and why it can be dangerous. And then down here, again, this is my catalog system. This stands for source number 2, which if I look on my catalog card is for this book, The Intellectual Life, right? And then the page number of where I got this. So this is coming from the introduction, which is why it's XII. You could see other cards like this, uninteresting subjects and people. He's talking about the zone of silence, and notice how these are like incrementing one by one. You can see I made some mistakes here. This is the third card. And now here's where things kind of get a little bit interesting. I want to introduce to you this concept of branching. So you don't necessarily have to be creating cards sequentially, just like boom, 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 one after the other. Sometimes you have a card where you want to go deeper and expand upon that thought. And so that's what I call branching. So if you look at this card, it looks like a normal card, 1/1/3. But then if you look at the next card, it goes 1/1/3-1. So I'm using the hyphens to denote that this card is not a different card. It's directly related and furthering the thought of this one. So that's why I'm branching down like this. And then you'll see the card behind it starts up 1/1/4. This is kind of a new concept and a new idea that's not directly related to this one. So again, I've got cards in front of this, and then I've got this card here, follow God step by step, don't dwell on the past. These two cards are like the same thought, which is why they've branched like this. And then once the branching kind of stops, I go into 1/1/4. So as you go through your bib card and your book and you're creating main cards, always remember to review the cards that you already have and find the spot for your new card. You want to put the new card closest to the card that is most related or relevant, right? So this is why when I was creating these cards here, this was the first card I created, but then I felt like this card should actually go in front of this one, so I put the 0. And then when I came across another piece of information, the zone of silence, I thought was directly most related to this one, so that's why I put it behind it and things like that. You got to remember that proximity is really the key here. Don't just file your cards randomly and put random arbitrary numbers and just shove them in the box. The whole idea is to keep all your closely related ideas as close to each other as possible. And one of the reasons why the analog Zettelkasten is so much better than some digital tool is because for each new main card you create, you're constantly reviewing your other cards in your box. So you're constantly refreshing your mind and memory of what already exists, and you're doing that before you then file the next card. And this is really next to impossible digitally, and it's nowhere near the same even if you could really do it digitally. So this kind of like tactile, physical handling of the cards is what really imprints these ideas in your mind and memory. And then of course, you're physically writing the notes, which there's been countless research, I'm not going to go into detail now, of how memory retention is so much better when you physically write with a pen and paper rather than just typing on a keyboard. Again, showing how things will change over time. Let me show you how I quote unquote made some mistakes using the Zettelkasten numbering system from Scott's way. So originally my first cards had to do with Zettelkasten. It's kind of meta. I have a Zettelkasten and then my notes are about Zettelkasten. I was basing those notes and cards upon Scott's book, which again, get a copy of that. And I was using his 5 category system, the academic disciplines. And so you'll notice here I have numbers 1 and 1, and then the Zettelkasten is like 4,225 and all of these kinds of things like this. This isn't really a mistake. This is just I realized after trying this system, wasn't really working for me. So then I created my own system. And so the point of me showing you this is that you can have different numbering systems, and this is going to change over time as you get more comfortable and more experienced. And that's okay, because we have our index to tell us where this information is located. At this point, your Zettelkasten should have your index cards right in the index section with your dividers if you have them, 1 letter per card. And now we're going to learn how to actually use our index. So we need to first reference the categories in our main cards in our index so we know where to find things. So let's take a look at my index, for example. If you look at this C card, this is when I was using Scott's system. You could see that I had a computer science in 4200. I had communication within information theory. This is the address for that card. If I go to, let's say, the letter M, right? Remember, I've got a category here, mind, with the number 1. So on my M card, I'm going to write mind, which is that category, and then the number 1. So this way I know when I'm coming back into my Zettelkasten, I've got to think, oh yeah, I have a section on mind. Where is that located? I just go to the letter M, and then I pull out my M card in the index, and it tells me it's the number 1. Then my next category is 1/1, right behind the mind card, and it has life of the mind and the intellectual life. So I kind of doubled this just in case I thought one way or the other. So I created on my L card, if I go to L in my index, right? You'll see here's L, life of the mind, 1/1. And then also, I can go to I for the intellectual life and look at that card, and then I've got the intellectual life 1/1. I'm not keeping track. If it has the in the title, I'm not going to track that. That'll just get way out of hand. So I'm just skipping the T for the and just going to intellectual life, which is why I filed it under I. And then the thing to remember is that you're not supposed to file every single index card in your Zettelkasten into your index. So it's not like I have a reference in my index for every single card that I've got right here. I only have some of the main categories right now and cards that I kind of want to call out or draw attention to. But the basic premise here is that you basically just want to write down and keep track of things so you can easily find them in the future. So the next time I want to see cards related to the life of the mind and my project, I will look for the L, right? I'll go to life of the mind, which is L, find my L card here. It tells me it's in 1/1. And then I go to my main cards, I find mind is 1, and then life of the mind 1/1. And then now I can dig in and find all the cards related to it. And it's really that simple. Okay, so now we have our index, right? We have our main cards, but we still have our bib cards here and the catalog. The bib cards get filed for me in alphabetical order by the author's last name, which is why I put the author's last name first on my bib cards. You can file them another way if you want. This is just the way that I've personally chosen to do it. As you create more and more bib cards, you'll probably want to purchase another set of these alphabetical dividers like we have in our index and use those for your bib cards. But since my Zettelkasten is fairly new, I don't really need one right now, and neither do you. So at least in the very early stages. I just file my bib cards in the back like so. And as you can see, this is one of the reasons why I really like this box, is that it has 4 different compartments and one for each section of my Zettelkasten. So now for the catalog system I've created, it's very, very simple. In Scott's book, he has you keep track of all your sources in a computer program called Zotero, which is a really excellent program, by the way, and it's completely free and open source. However, I wanted an analog system and did not want my Zettelkasten to have any dependencies outside of it. It's really important to me personally that everything is self-contained in this box. I don't want to have to then open up a program and look at that, and then God forbid that database of Zotero gets compromised and then I lose all of my sources, which are written down on my cards, and I'm kind of screwed. So I wanted everything self-contained. You can do whatever you want with yours and experiment and try different things. My catalog, again, we've gone over this. I take out an index card, I write down each source and the number, and that's it. It's as simple as it can possibly get. And then another added little bonus and benefit is this way too, I can see how many sources are in my Zettelkasten. Not that that information is particularly necessary, but it's kind of neat and interesting for me to know anyways. Okay, so I hope you found this video helpful. And hopefully you're less intimidated and overwhelmed, as there's really like a lot of confusing information online about how to create and use a Zettelkasten. Like I've mentioned several times before already, make sure to get a copy of Scott's books if you really want to dig into this and go deeper. This book is well over 500 pages. It's close to 600 pages, and I can't possibly cover that much material in a single video. In the comments section, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll do what I can to try and help you. Thanks for watching. Cheers.